Just so you're aware, no one wanted me in Philos. Yet it's you who awakened me, the person who blesses me. It must be you.
We all have an idea of love interests' homes in Love and Deepspace, right? From Xavier's natural warmth to Raphael's organized chaos, Caleb and MC's childhood home versus his place in Skyhaven to Zane's sleek and clean, each perfectly mirrors its inhabitants. But I was curious about Silas. Did you ever question where and how he lives exactly, or what his place says about him? Answer to this question might seem evident, and you might be inclined to say the base in the N109 zone, but as you can see, this is a very long video, so obviously I have more to say. So let's scratch that surface a bit more, shall we? If this is your first time stumbling into my channel, first of all, welcome. I suggest you watch the introduction video first for more context on this project. I honestly apologize for that video. It was hastily done and is hard to listen to. I know, but I will be referring to it further down the road. For the rest, let's dive in. To set the tone for my approach to Silas and his idea of home, I'd like to read a passage from a memoir that I revisited while I was brainstorming for this video. The Romanian philosopher Mircea Eliade talks about home, ontological as well as geographical home, and in a lovely phrase, he calls home the heart of the real. Home, he tells us, is the intersection of two lines, the vertical and the horizontal. The vertical plane has heaven, or the upper world, at one end, and the world of the dead at the other end. The horizontal plane is the traffic of this world moving to and fro, our own traffic and that of teeming others. Home was a place of order, a place where the order of things come together, the living and dead, the spirits of the ancestors and the present inhabitants, and the gathering up and stilling of all the to and fro. Leaving home can only happen because there is a home to leave, and the leaving is never just a geographical or spatial separation, it is an emotional separation, wanted or unwanted, steady or ambivalent. For the refugee, for the homeless, the lack of this crucial coordinate in the placing of the self has severe consequences. At best, it must be managed, made up for in some way. At worst, a displaced person, literally, does not know which way is up because there is no true north, no compass point. Home is much more than shelter. Home is our center of gravity. Nomadic people learn to take their homes with them, and the familiar objects are spread out or re-erected from place to place. When we move house, we take with us the invisible concept of home, but it is a very powerful concept. The mental health and emotional continuity do not require us to stay in the same house or the same place, but they do require a sturdy structure on the inside. And that structure is built in part by what has happened on the outside. The inside and the outside of our lives are each the shell where we learn to live. Home was problematic for me. It did not represent order and it did not stand for safety. I left home at 16, and after that, I was always moving until finally, almost by accident, I found and kept two places, both modest, one in London and one in the country. I have never lived with anyone in either of those homes. I'm not entirely happy about that, but when I did live with someone, and for 13 years, I could only manage it by having a lot of separate space. I'm not messy, I'm organized, and I cook and clean very happily, but another presence is hard for me. I wish it were not so, because I would really like to live with someone I love. I just don't think I know how to do that. So it is better to accept my not quite adjusted need for distance and privacy. This was from Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal by Janet Winterson. I still remember how struck I was by this passage when I first read it 3 years ago, and as someone who places immense importance on both the home itself, as in wherever I live in at that particular time, and home as a concept, it was impossible for me to miss this Wayne and Silas's narrative and how interconnected it was with his character, and more importantly, his self worth. I plan to delve deeper into the latter in the next part of the series. I should also note that in the last one card or two, or in the home future that rolled out during the writing of the script, there's a distinct shift from how he was previously with regards to his relationship with home. So I'll be kind of disregarding those for the time being and touch upon them when necessary. In order to understand the shift, we have to understand his past first anyway. So, for now, I want us to go back to the beginning and think about how Silas was introduced and our first impression of him. A good character design immediately communicates a handful of feelings and compels us to associate what we see with certain tropes. My longtime readers and online friends know that, despite its negative connotation, I use the word trope in the most neutral sense because it is nothing but a narrative tool and it's up to the creator how to implement it and what purpose it serves within the structure. In that regard, Silas represents the rich bad boy archetype in the group. He's a tall, imposing man with glaring red eyes and a disarming gaze. When they meet for the first time, she's first saved, then kidnapped by him and the two masked henchmen of his. She was unconscious for 3 whole days and then was forced to resonate with him, where at some point, Silas even suggested scaring her by releasing this thing on her. I just know she'd have gone viral if she ever took part in a worst first date interview. I just know it. And with limited backstory or information, simply going off on the visual cues, Silas's reaction to MC failing to resonate with him can only be read as angry, and he seems rather impatient, but I didn't understand why he felt that way. In Captivating Moments' third chapter, when, MC and Silas spar, then she takes a shower, finds a second set of clothes she wore that day prepared for her, and asks Silas how he's found the time to do this. He responds with,
If I didn't anticipate every possible outcome of an event, I wouldn't be where I am now.
I wondered why a man of his caliber, and judging from the first main story arc, a man who thrives off of negotiations, mind games, and can foresee so many steps ahead, would get angry or impatient. Like, he even says, instead of controlling people, I rather have the situation in the palm of my hand, or something along those lines on the main screen. I was suspicious, but didn't dwell on it for long at the time. Now that I replay the main story and have more of an understanding of his character as well as his past timelines, I can read his emotions for what they are. He was deeply frustrated, desperate, and in pain. Now, before you go,
Get to the point.
and feed me to the wonders, because what the heck his being angry or frustrated have to do with his house, I ask you to trust the process. It will be related. While I cannot say he never said it, I could find maybe one instance he did. He almost never refers to the place he's staying with the twins and Mephi as home. It's a base for Onikinus, first and foremost, as in a military base. He does sometimes use the word place, though maybe up until the very recent cards where MC and Silas are now an item, I don't really remember him using the words home or house to refer to his place. He just refers to it as base. It is revealed that he has so many armories or owns residences. In Captivating Moment, they first stay at a presidential suite that seems to be permanently available to him as one of the many places he stays at. And the suite must have looked so homely because the first question MC asks is, "Don't you live in the base?" So Silas's response,
Is a person forced to only have one residence?
and the suite having everything that Silas cherishes, from boxing to gaming, karaoke room, a separate room full of records, and his antique instrument collection, etc., further proves that this is truly a residence rather than a random expensive hotel room. It is also interesting that, as the player, we don't have a full concrete idea of the totality of the places he owns. The most fleshed out one is the base, but even that is rather vague, especially architectural plan wise. Beyond Cloudfall, the Dragon Myth is chronologically the first story where we truly get into his sense of home, or lack thereof. To refresh your memory, in the second chapter, when Silas first brings MC to a different cave than the one they met when she was thrown into the abyss, her first question is this your home? She's pulling the damn you live like this card in every timeline. But, she assumes that because there are no blood stains around and it's better lit, so that must be the case. To which Silas replies with,
Have you ever met a fiend with a home?
his tone is neither sarcastic nor scornful or vulnerable, but it isn't posed as a question that awaits an answer either. While we can't really talk about a dwelling of sorts when it comes to dragons, they do have a place they exist, a place that is theirs, which is the valley and the surrounding mountains with caves in Tarus City. Yet, it would be a stretch to call the cave Silas's home. Then we have Crimson Spirit, the fiend vampire myth, where Silas is summoned to MC's world from his home, the Underworld. Throughout their timelines, we will see role reversals like this between Silas and MC. For example, in Beyond Cloudfall, it was MC who was forcibly removed from her home and thrown into Silas's world, and now it's the opposite. Here, Silas's relationship with the castle he lives in is yet again complicated, but compared to when he was a dragon, I'd argue it's in a better place. He does call this castle home, which can be seen as a progress, uh, but it only feels that way to him because of the pipe organ. I will get into this detail a bit more later on, but we know that Silas came into this timeline with a melody in mind, but had no recollection of where he'd heard it. Though we know that it's the requiem MC sang for him to bless his death. It was the first object that felt familiar to him, hence he latched onto the castle as his home, but he still isn't as attached to the castle as he is to MC. We have bits of info on MC's relationship with home as well. Previously, she was also conflicted when it came to Ivory Tower, but still reminisced about it fondly, at least partially. In Crimson Spirit, the manor she lives in as a countess, I'd argue, is more like a fake home. It's a facade with a forged lineage, because I'm sure you remember the portraits of her mother, grandmother, and the grandmother, and it's all based on her because she has no family or roots to speak of. It's simply a place where she uses to conduct research on sacred core. So it's not like she thinks of this place as home. On the contrary, she keeps repeating that she isn't a being that's supposed to exist, that she's an anomaly. Both of these myths include a section in the narrative where Silas and MC experience a domestic and happy period, or at least, I don't know, they dream of it, I guess, because I'm still not fully convinced that they actually happened, but I don't know, maybe remained as their wish. But yeah, that's beyond the scope of this video. So I'll leave it at that. So, why are Silas's feelings complicated when it comes to home and belonging? And how does this complexity shape his character and relationship with MC? It should be quite obvious, at least to the believers of Silas supremacy, that there's an underlying current to his initial AO3 ruthless mafia leader AU impression, right? In every myth or timeline, he's the villain on the surface, but as you go through the story, the MC, and together with her, we realize what he truly is, a scapegoat. In colloquial speech, we use the second metaphorical meaning, but Silas does correspond, kinda, to the first one as well, especially if you bear in mind how religious belief and fanaticism are two of the core themes to his narrative. Okay, so I'm basing this small part on my very little, very limited knowledge. So please don't come at me. I'm fragile. To me, it seems like, from my experience, none of the love interests seem to mention any type of family or parents, found or blood related, it doesn't matter. Aside from Caleb finding family and more in his childhood home. However, again, to my knowledge, none of them are depicted in settings that make it ambiguous or impossible for them to have other kindred beings around. Raphael is a sociable person. He's a Lemurian. He lives in the sea, which is an ecosystem. Xavier has his friends. Zane, I don't know, except maybe his God of Annihilation myth. I don't have the card. I haven't played it. That's just the vibe I get. But in the rest of his stories, he seems to have others he's connected to. Also, he does mention having parents who are also in the medical field when he's introducing himself to your parents in the tete-a-tete section, but Silas's roots are shrouded in mystery. His environment is one that forces him to be lonely, and it's a detail that explicitly has a place in these narratives. In Beyond Cloudfall, we find out that Silas believed he was a human until he started growing horns and scales, and he does remember looking exactly like a human. I will not speculate on his origins until we get more info or hints in that regard, but just one possibility that comes to mind is maybe he was an abandoned human child and was cursed, or maybe something like that happened, and he started to transform like MC has, or it could be a metaphorical transformation related to adolescence, as in his awakening to sexual and material desires. Well, regardless, the moment he started to change, he realized that he had nowhere to belong. He was neither fully a dragon nor fully a human. As he says to MC how people fear who are different from them, he knew cohabitating with humans would prove to be impossible. So he chose the place that would let him in, Tarus City. The city is surrounded by mountains and burnt forests with a small patch of Datura Valley. We don't know how he ended up there, and while it seemed like this was not a place he felt he truly belonged to, it was still a city that let him be. Unfortunately, the sanctuary that practically weaponized MC against Silas has slayed every dragon to exist, went after Silas as well, labeling him as the true evil. Oh, my heart was absolutely broken when I noticed during the replay that Silas's capture MC keeps seeing in her dreams happened at that exact Dathra Valley. The very first place in this world that permitted him to exist, that showed him that even in desolate places, you could find beauty. He lacks history or roots that he can trace back to that can ground him and to help make sense of his current self. But he, you know, at least he had something to hold on to, even if it's complicated. He reveals this tender side without going into specific details to MC when they were talking about Ivory Tower.
Why can't you leave that place behind? Ah, you consider that place your home. Face it. No matter how much you hate it or want to leave, a home is still a part of your soul. The more you try to excise it, the more you'll be reminded of who you are.
As you can see, he is no stranger to the concept of home, though he seems to be using it in a broader manner that also includes the hometown. It's a small detail, and I can't be sure if it's intentional on the localization team side to reflect the original Chinese meaning or it's just a coincidence. But the word choice excise in the last sentence kind of caught me off guard. To excise means to cut off or to carve out something, especially in a surgical manner. And it feels like a bittersweet nod to both Silas trying to excise his horns and scales so he can fit in with humans, and to MC after removing it from Silas's chest becoming the only weapon that can kill the fiend, a sword. He has internalized that he's a monster, both because he's a creature that is neither this nor that, and he's condemned for being a threat to humans due to his feeding on souls. His life is under constant danger with soldiers from Legion trying to slay him, and they finally imprison him in the abyss. In Crimson Spirit, he's a vampire slash fiend whose sustenance is dependent on humans' blood. He clawed his way up to the top in the underworld, and as a result, his name has traveled far and wide. Many mages feared him, but also sought to subdue him for his power for their personal goals. Meanwhile, he spends his days, just like he did in the cave, lonely and bored out of his mind, surrounded by weapons his hunters used in their assassination attempts. Not only he has no knowledge of his roots and feels like he truly doesn't belong anywhere, he is hated for who he is, for simply existing, or what others think of his existence stands for. I'm not interested in judging any character or happening from a moral perspective, but if you look at these events from Silas's point of view, you are thrown into this world. You have no idea where you're from or who you are. The only things that guide you are your primal instincts. In these cases, staying alive, toying with souls, and feeding on blood, and a deep rooted but unconscious urge to find what's missing without an idea what you're searching for. Just like in Crimson Spirit, where MC asks why he chose this castle particularly when he could live in or travel to any place or timeline he could want. At first, Silas jokingly responds with,
Must there be a reason? This might be the only place where I've seen a pipe organ.
but then genuinely explains,
It's the only object that feels familiar to me.
and he had no other option than to hold on to it. And it only makes sense that it's the centerpiece of the castle. I mean, just imagine you think you're similar to a group of beings, yet they label you as the root of all evil, calamity, and everything that's wrong in the world, which happens in every timeline he's a part of, by the way. And they expect you to pay your dues with your life. They are the ones who corner you and inflict violence on you, and when you retaliate, somehow you're the monster again. It's pretty fucked up. So when I think about all these details, what they communicate to me is that Silas has so many places to go except one to call home. never had the luxury to settle down and be in a community that he feels he's a part of. And this is a thread that still continues to the current timeline. As I mentioned in the introduction video, the first event I experienced was the wedding banner, and I rewatched Silas's Kindled video an embarrassing number of times. Partly for reasons you can think of, and partly because, similar to the long awaited Revelry arc, there was something about his conversation with MC that just didn't make clear sense to me, or more like it felt disjointed. I was lucky to get Zane's card as well, my side boo. And comparing the two, Silas's version didn't seem like a happy occasion at all. I watched the rest of the love interests Kindle videos online to be sure, and yeah, the rest are romantic and hopeful in the sense that they talk about eternity, forever, devotion. You see them move upwards like Zane's or Caleb's, or they move forward in space like Xavier's and Raphael's. Or look at the color palettes. Caleb and Raphael's are sunlit and lush. Xavier's have the crescent moon and light to warm the nightscape. Even Zane's, I mean, his kind and subdued smile has a power of three suns for me. But, despite the ice and frost, everything glistens, and the background that resembles a library is tinted with pinks and purples. They are surrounded by blooming flowers, plus his cute little ears that turn pink. Adorable. However, you look at Silas's version, and the overall air was rather solemn, despite the iridescent church window at the altar and crimson being his color and, belonging to the warm reds. There is nothing warm about that place. There are flowers. Some look like datura flowers, others look like roses, but they also talk about wine, so I'm not really sure what kind of flowers they are, but they appear, when MC holds Silas's hand wrapping around when they resonate, but they wither away quickly. I will come back to the significance of flowers in Silas's narrative later in this video. And no, not just the Datura flower and its relation to the Tarus City. I think there's more to his relationship to nature in general. So, compared to the other love interests who move up or forward, Silas and MC descend. They are the only ones who truly acknowledge that this spatial anomaly they are in will soon end. MC and Silas, talk about endings, the church fading away, the world ending, MC asking Silas whether he's brave to follow her, or said that this is all going to end. Doomsday.
And all that jazz.
Wet blanket much? Even the music reflects that bittersweet tone, and I'm like, what is even going on here? Did I accidentally walk into a funeral? But of course, just like how it always is with Silas, despite the solemn, dreary shell, there's a really tender and heartwarming core to the alternative Darkborn story. The recurring detail in the visual narrative is MC persistently pushing open the door to the church, which obviously represents Silas's past and roots, and she does so despite the warnings both from the association and Silas. How they keep repeating how dangerous it is to stay there, how the energy is unstable, or a hunter should know when to quit, etc. Her insistence on exploring the old church and the person who might have used the space, whom she figures out later is Silas, is crucial. But the way Silas perceives or understands this safe house, which he later refers to as a place he tried to turn into a home is also important to ruminate more deeply on. Now I can articulate that Silas is a seize the moment kind of man, but in a tragic, there might never be a tomorrow or even the next hour manner. In the event story, Silas's wish he writes on the paper is tomorrow is also a part of the future. Would you like to spend it with me? Or he occasionally says they should make the most of their time together to MC. In Beyond Cloudfall, Silas promises.
In that case, stay by my side until the end of time.
But that end of time is not forever, but until the moment when they'll meet their end is finally at their doorstep, which is an example of his not making eternal, grandiose promises, making plans in the far distant future or dream in the traditional sense. He is still in the process of learning. There have been instances where Silas's suggestions meet MC's, oh, but I didn't prepare anything, or it's too soon, etc. And Silas has the what's there to prepare, just be at the door tomorrow morning, that's enough kind of attitude. At first, I thought, so we are truly living in a rich man's world, huh? He doesn't need any preparations, money and connections can handle it all. But now I see that while the money and connections can and do ease these large scale impromptu escapades, it's more about him not settling down, like at all. This is largely made possible, aside from the material means, by the exceptional survival instincts he honed throughout the years. The whole world is against them and is clearly after whatever part of him they can get their hands on. As a result, he's always vigilant. On the main screen, he sometimes says, when you touch me like that next time, let me know in advance. My bullets don't have the time to tell the difference between kindness and malice. And that's sad, really. In improvised flow, the Polar Night event, MC and Silas are on their way back when she questions how everyone readily accepted that the Polar Night would end and the sun would return again. But what would happen if it didn't? In a relaxed manner, Silas replies that this experience is N109 Zone's normal, and even if the sun didn't rise tomorrow, they just keep on living as they have been for the past few days. He's quick to adapt to whatever world throws at him and has always been one to do whatever it takes to stand on his own feet. But only now, and only because he's found someone to trust and to teach him, he's in the process of learning how to exist in the world as a team, as he, again, mentions in the same card.
Someone once told me, when you're forced to turn your back to the dark, you need someone you can truly trust. Now, I've found the person who will learn this lesson with me.
So I don't read this side of him as, being carefree or reckless, but rather as someone whose life is under constant threat, who can never truly wind down and let go. Which also makes me think that his interest in motorcycles and cars, but especially motorcycles, is intentional. They do seem like they are replacements for his wings in his previous lives. They allow him to go wherever he wants, whenever he wants, as fast as he wants. And this is also why he enjoys going on rides with MC and wants her to get better at it. His not settling down and not having a place to call home tells me that the only thing that's left for him to cherish, that he can carry with him at all times and even take to the grave, that no one can forcibly take away or tarnish, is his memories. That's why it's extremely crucial for Silas that MC remembers him. I will dive deeper into the implications of this in the next part of the project, but he knows deep down that no one will be willing to remember him, let alone reminisce about him in a good light. No one will erect a statue of him as the sanctuary did of his captor, or paint a mural to tell his side of the story and treasure him. On the contrary, the only story that will live in the minds of future generations will be the violent and quote unquote righteous extermination that's painted on the ceiling in the sanctuary. No one cherished his existence, and surely no one will cherish his memory except MC. She is the last bastion of his existence, and without her, it's as if he never lived in the first place. I'm still not sure if love interests in Love and Deep Space reincarnate with the knowledge of or memories from their past lives, though it seems like the memories maybe accumulate the more they are reborn. I don't know. Still, whichever is the case. This is why Silas is distraught and frustrated when MC doesn't remember him when they meet in a long awaited revelry, and all the more pained when she's terrified of him and subconsciously rejects him. Her refusal is akin to his existence being denied. So I believe Silas's concept of home, or what he perceives as home, is the memories he has of MC and, as an extension, MC herself. It is also in line with their dynamic that, just like how weaponry that is used by others set out to kill Silas now decorate his home, his destined archnemesis is his home itself. Can't believe I typed that sentence with my own two hands and free will. Now I need a break. Infold provides a glimpse into this through how MC sees Silas as well, sometimes in subtle, other times in overt ways. There's a scene in Beyond Cloudfall that deeply affected me. It's right after their first quote unquote revenge at the sanctuary. After the raid, MC is going on about revenge and the oracle that threw her into the abyss not being there, but she notices that Silas isn't paying attention and sees him standing in a beam of light where he's practically basking in the sun, the very sun that never shone on him for the 1,600 years he was sealed in the abyss, the one that barely shows its face to the city. He's probably enjoying the warmth and the brightness of it. A similar line crops up in Crimson Spirit, where MC fills the coffin with roses to recreate the feeling of flying in a field of flowers, bringing the garden she was tending to in the human world. And when she asks how it feels, Silas says,
I can believe I'm basking in the sun.
going back to MC seeing Silas standing deep within the sanctuary under the rays of the sun, and she thinks to himself, his figure stands out against the pure white architecture, yet he's like a statue that belongs here. She thinks that even if it's something that clashes with the rest, what he represents has a place in this world, whereas on a personal level, he has the right to coexist with the rest as he is. There is a lot to be said about, again, as I mentioned, religious belief, pureness, and fanaticism with regards to this story, but it's out of the scope of this part. But I don't know. Let me know if you'd like me to return to this. There are many instances where MC reaffirms his existence, like her line in Crimson Spirit, Silas, you are no longer an existence that no one wants. But another example I wanted to touch upon, which belongs to the current timeline, is the Ordinary Traces card where they visit the local temple in Lincoln for the New Year Day festivities. Upon MC's invitation, he's quick to teasingly ask what makes her think someone like him will fit into such a happy and bright picture. But of course, MC kindly shuts him up. And further down the story, when they're playing with the hand puppets at the fair, MC thinks how his smile warms her heart and how in this warm, peaceful world, there's a place for Sylus. He's always the one who had to be alone involuntarily to live in a cold, dark world, being punished for simply existing. In Lucky Charm, one of my favorite voice calls where MC gifts Silas a bracelet with a cat's eye charm, Silas looks up what the gem symbolizes, and this iconic line graces us.
I don't need more strength, and I get more curses than blessings. Love, though. Is that what you...
Oh, I adore the way the English VA acted that line, but it's also bittersweet how often he returns to how he's used to being cursed at, how he's used to having only himself to rely on and never having it easy, having to collect blessings, or how his way of relating to the outer world is always transactional and hierarchical in nature. Whenever MC asks if he'll be sad when something's about to end, like the vacation they took, the church that's fading away, or she's sad that she couldn't get a plushie, he just responds with lines like, "Let it be, we'll create another chance, we can always come back. If we die, let's accept death because we each carry a part of the other inside, and we'll surely find each other in another life." Because a world without ending is doomed to stagnation, and without an ending, something new cannot begin. This is the theme that runs throughout Crimson Spirit, and there's an important section in the Primordial Chaos card which immediately brings back this famous Hesse quote from Damien to mind.
Most people endure the status quo while secretly hoping for a new established order to arrive. But that is built on the destruction of the old world. So people create dragons to overturn the current world for them. All the dreams they don't dare to realize are realized by it. I know you want to kill me. I want to kill you too, for the future and established order you desire. Using any means necessary is fair.
So the crucial part in Silas's line is people creating dragons. The dragon here referring to an actor that is brought into the equation to solely overthrow the old. In his case, it's the dragon, the fiend, and the outlaw boss, but as the player, we know the kind of fate that awaits an actor like him. They are branded as the evil, the harbinger of destruction, so that just and pure ones can reap the spoils of the new order and paint themselves as the hero. And this is the position Silas finds himself in every timeline. And he's pretty much internalized this cycle of life since he knows what immortality and stagnation feel like, the loneliness it brings, and how eventually dreadful it is. All he needs is to meet MC, make the most of their time to the best of their abilities, and bravely accept the ending their togetherness will bring, because fearing the ending will only prevent them from being together, especially with regards to how often tearing down the illusion and seeing the truth for what it is and in its entirety as a theme comes up in Silas's narrative. Caleb's too, though I have to note that there's a heavy, tragic tone to their togetherness due to them being each other's destined arch nemesis. Hoping death will visit a home in order is a blessing people wish on others where I'm from, despite how harsh it may sound. A child not passing away before their parents, not losing a family member or a friend due to a chronic illness or accident. Life and death happening in a natural order, in some sense, is a blessing. It is, I'd argue, easier to reason with and comparatively easier to accept. Rilke illustrates this beautifully in his semi autobiographical novel, The Notebooks of Malte Loritz Brigg. In the old days, people knew, or perhaps had an intuition, that they bore their death within them like the stone within a fruit. Children had a small one within, and adults a large one. Women bore theirs in the womb, and men theirs in their breast. It was something people quite simply had, and the possession conferred a peculiar dignity and a tranquil pride. Simply by virtue of being alive, we carry that within us. Modern conveniences, urban planning, and medicine are all interventions that delay the inevitable. So we could consider plants and animals that aren't tended to by humans. And I guess if you disregard climate change, they are closer to the natural order and balance than the rest. Now, while I'm against projecting human emotions or actions on nature, such as jealousy or taking revenge, because what nature does is to simply restore a balance, plants and animals are resilient and persistent, and in a metaphorical sense, they insist on life until their time to leave their place to the next comes. And it wouldn't be surprising for any Love and Deep Space player that Silas and MC's union is one unmistakably marked by life as much as by death, both at the hands of the other. Now, let's think of the places Silas has lived and is living in the current timeline. Tarus City, the way MC puts it, is a place where fiends lurk, an endless crimson mountain range covered with forests that are void of life with their scorched trees surrounds the lonely city. The only instance where we get a good glimpse into the valley and the abyss is the official promotional video for Where Drake Shadows Fall. From how the city and surroundings were described and some of the images used as background in the myth, I imagine the city to be much more barren and lifeless, maybe except for the marketplace. And I guess I need to confess, I saw this promotional video just last week. Fake fan detected. Anyways, the valley has some weed like greenery and datura flowers growing in a small, secluded part of the mountain range. So, like, I wouldn't call the rest of the city cheerful and vivid, judging from MC's surprise upon seeing the valley. And the color palette doesn't scream lively either, but again, there is at least something. We can also deduce that datura flowers must be a very resilient type of plant, like cacti, where you have to try really hard for them to completely die. The city and valley also doubles as a metaphor for Silas having a part of him inside, albeit small, that is alive and kind, worth cherishing, and is pretty, though you have to put effort into discovering this hidden side. But, as is always the case with love and deep space, it's not all sunshine and flowers. This meaningful valley is also the place where the Legion attacked and violently captured him, and that's why it's significant that MC blesses Silas with a flower, something that is delicate yet resilient, that needs sun and water to sustain itself as much as the next being, has roots, and more importantly, something that is beautiful, full of vitality, and is a part of an ecosystem, a greater picture. You can immediately notice how his stern expression melts into a surprised but sweet one, and how keenly he watches MC's movements, almost with a childlike curiosity. I really, really love this cut. And I'm sure the places MC puts flowers escaped no one. One on his horn and the other on the scales. Both are sides of him that he's thought of as monstrous and tried to cut off with a blade. And Silas's
Only you and this flower can touch me here.
line becomes all the more heartbreaking when you bear in mind he brought MC to a place that carries great meaning and is tainted by deeply traumatic memories. And this is a declaration almost that he won't let anyone get as close in such a place. He isn't fond of others touching his head for very understandable reasons, yet he is finally able to trust her enough to let her place a flower in his hair. Another reason that convinced me that they considered this valley as their home, but I'm using the word in a loose manner, was when Silas was hurt, they didn't return to the cave, which would be the sensible choice considering how safe it is, but they returned to the valley. So, of course, his bones scatter as petals, and of course, MC thinks, I smell a floral fragrance. Is this the scent of his soul that carries a faint, scorching bitterness? Because that's who Silas is in her eyes. The underworld, again, in Silas's words, is a graveyard for the discarded. I think this thread in Crimson Spirit is pretty self explanatory, and this is partly why, despite loving the myth to the core, the execution was a bit annoying for me. I have to be real, because they literally spoon fed the details and, like, capital letter made us sure we got what happened in the story. But, well, anyways, that's besides the point. The underworld is again a very desolate place with extremely strong magnetic fluctuations and discarded fates, in other words, timelines. Throughout the story, we see him getting a bit too comfortable in his fake husband role and how sweetly the word wife falls from his lips.
Dearest wife, my wife's blood, lovely wife. Dearest wife, to my wife.
His deep yearning for belonging, companionship, and an intimate relationship outside of the transactional and hierarchical ones he's used to is crowned by how ecstatic he feels when taking care of MC the first time he had to bring her to the castle. Her being the rose and Silas being the mist is repeated throughout using poetry or dreams, but in this video's context, the one line I wanted to highlight is Silas's
When the roses bloom again, will you remember who I am now?
what entices Silas, not just in this one but in every timeline, is MC's vitality, her stubborn insistence on clinging to life, no matter how against the odds her circumstances is. So it makes so much sense that a flower symbolizes her, and the rose blooming in that line is a reference to her being reborn in another timeline. The tone and the themes of this myth are very similar to that of alternative Darkborns, with finding refuge in a dark, abandoned place, trying to make a home out of it, but eventually not feeling attached and not feeling sad when it collapses now that he has MC with him. N109 Zone is a desolate, lawless place that is, I'd argue, defined by scarcity. Now, you might raise your hand and go,
Excuse me?
This is the N109 zone, filled with skyscrapers and rich people. And I get where you're coming from, but this is a zone that gets no sunlight, is devoid of vegetation. There are probably barely any animals, and the natural resources are scarce. It is mentioned that when Ever's laboratory was in that area, it was a bustling city, but then it turned out to what it is now. And this is just a musing on my part, but it's likely that there happened a large scale disaster which heavily affected the climate and resources of the area due to whatever went wrong with Ever's laboratory, and N109 Zone has become the wasteland it is today. When the natural resources are scarce and you have to live by the rule of the strongest instead of having established institutions that redistribute the wealth, there are no laws to abide by. The wealth gap between the top and the bottom is almost as wide as the abyss, and distrust runs through the veins of society. The scarcity runs much deeper than, say, not having the means to buy bread for a day. So I'm using the word in a broader and deeper sense. In this timeline, there are two events that I want to touch upon. First, I'll be returning to Captivating Moment. Maybe you remember how MC tags along Sylus to his card game with Khaosi to prove herself that she won't be a liability. After the meeting, they are at the park in front of the building, and the morning has just begun. Despite being steel tailed, they decide to sit on a bench and eat a simple breakfast. Just then, a stray cat approaches them for food. Now, if you have ever spent time around any kind of pet or animal in general, you know that you don't just tower over animals as an almost 2 meter long guy and immediately touch them. More so if it's a cat. It's clear Silas doesn't know how to approach an animal, and the cat is naturally scared. Their whole conversation is gold, provides so much insight into both of their characters and their dynamic together. But for the sake of brevity, I'd like to focus on MC asking whether he likes animals. He replies,
I don't like or dislike them. To me, they're harmless.
he views other living beings through the lens of harm and danger because the only way of existing for Silas is in survival mode. Though the way he phrases those lines clearly conveys that he does care deep inside, especially since he later says,
It's not often you get to see plants. I wanted to appreciate them.
when MC wonders why they didn't just up and leave when the deal was done. Not mentioning Mephi in this section would be a disservice to my little mechanical boo. While I adore that Silas is a huge nerd, I think his creating Mephi as a crow is not a coincidence because he could very well make a drone like surveillance gadget that could have every feature Mephi has. So, why make him a crow? Remember, in Night Plumes, MC finds an injured dove and it needs constant attention and care, but she's about to embark on a mission. The first person she thinks of entrusting it to is Silas. Even she herself is surprised because why him of all people, but she still visits the base. As always, Silas doesn't make it easy for her, yet takes very good care of the dove. When the time comes to set it free, though, he takes MC and the dove to Lincoln. And when MC wonders why they had to travel all the way just to release it, Silas teases her by saying,
You'd rather release it into the N109 zone. I guess you don't believe it's lived a fulfilling life.
he has no business being this funny. Well, anyways, they both know that it's not a safe environment for a living, breathing animal. And this whole exchange is again a loaded conversation with so many layers. But that's par for the course with these two kindred spirits. I squeeze Night Plumes here since it's one of my favorite stories. However, that isn't the other instance I wanted to mention. It's the text messages MC exchanges with Sylus when the intimacy level reaches 606. And I'm not kidding when I tell you I teared up when I first experienced it. In Sprouting Lettuce, Silas messages MC to let her know that the lettuce seedling she's been trying to cultivate has finally sprouted. All three of the reply options end with Silas questioning why she is so hellbent on trying to grow something that needs sunlight, so much care and diligence, and will probably end with failure in a place like N109 Zone. And in their next exchange, he isn't very optimistic about it all. But of course, MC's confidence and willpower are contagious, and my favorite option in the last messages is this. Have some faith in my plans. If I can survive the M109 zone, it can too. Then I hope it takes after its owner and lives fearlessly. I wasn't planning to talk about Khaosi since I'd be repeating pretty similar stuff to earlier, and there are still sides to this story that I'm not able to make sense of yet, but I decided to make a couple of remarks at the last minute. It is, again, a planet that suffers from other planets colliding, and as a result, it's a place that is near impossible to survive. As MC witnesses, the vegetation immediately withers due to erythrostones, and the Khaosi inhabitants try to get a piece of the stone despite the corrosion it causes and the health risks, which rings not at all dissimilar to valuable natural resource miners in impoverished countries in real life. Especially if you consider Chaosi's harsh environment is caused by the debris that is spewed from other planets' clash. Deliberate wink. These stones are the sole valuable aspect of Khaosi, and due to the strong magnetic interference, it's extremely hard to invade. This means Khaosi's natural resources and conditions put this planet, and as an extension, Sylus, in a position that is both feared and wanted. The Empire is openly vocal about wanting to annex Khaosi, which is a unilateral declaration of forcible acquisition of territory by one state at the expense of another state, and it is one of the principal modes of acquiring territory, as described in the Max Planck Encyclopedia of Public International Law. While annexing is not synonymous with colonization, there are lines where MC mentions the made up stories about Khaosi inhabitants and Silas about their monstrosity, othering them and having the tendency to see them as quote unquote lesser or barbaric. As a result, the Empire's desire is not the kind of want that honors or respects Khaosi, Silas, or its inhabitants. And considering all the things he must have gone through to become the sovereign of Khaosi and the military power that he is today, you'd assume Silas would at least, I don't know, feel some kind of possessiveness, if not attachment or belonging to the planet. But he feels nothing, or at least he puts it that way. And as with every timeline, his nonchalance is alarming to MC. And in each timeline, all Silas seemingly wants is if he is to go down, he'll do so with his head held high and on his own terms. Examining these places one after another, I think the running thread is rather clear. Being who he is and the role he is destined to play in the grand scheme of things, Silas has nowhere to go but these places where, unless you have thick skin and are quick on your feet, you have no chance of survival. In real life, when we think of a barren place that's hard to survive, usually a desert comes to mind, right? But deserts have their own ecosystems, climates, and animals that have adapted to the conditions there, and they are still an important part of the world's ecosystem at large. That's why it was important for me to make this distinction that the places Silas had to call home are anti-life. These places are against life and you survive despite the conditions it forces on you. If you can survive, that is. His disconnect from plants and animals is partly due to the dreary places he's more or less forced to live in, and partly due to his never having had the chance to experience a communal life. Until finding companionship in MC in each of these timelines, if you think about it, he has never truly tasted the joy of sharing a meal, exchanging gifts, going shopping, or just being responsible for another living being except himself, where most of the time protecting his own life meant taking another. I leave his being extremely awkward when receiving gifts or being in crowds to the next part. I think it's interesting. But maybe you remember MC and Silas's talk about him actually being a young dragon in Beyond Cloudfall. There, MC says Silas doesn't understand the song's melody, can't see the beauty in patterns, and can't even taste the flavors of food, to which he replies with,
Dragons don't need those things to survive.
here, survival is key again, and I argue that it isn't a case of him not understanding, as in lacking the ability, but just being a stranger to the simple, everyday pleasures of a life shared with others bring. The way he is and the environments he finds himself in still don't allow him to find company in others. And I don't use the word just in romantic sense. And even with MC, it takes a great amount of time and many tribulations to even reach a point where he's open to the idea of trusting her. Let me repeat that. Not trusting her, but being open to the idea of trusting her. However, you can trace the timeline of him refining his taste and appreciation when it comes to worldly pleasures, such as food, music, luxurious objects, and antiques, while keeping MC's words close to his heart. That true value comes from something a little warmer. So, I don't think he really hates sunlight or animals or thinks it's super useless of MC to try to grow lettuce in the base in his heart of hearts. But I'll say he's scared for reasons I will get into in the next video, and he has to learn how to trust others and to love himself, care for others, peel off that thick skin layer by layer, and be accountable for someone else. That's what he's learning with MC now, and this will be Silas's true rebirth.
From the moment we're born to when we breathe our last, we shall inevitably walk the same path. It's the greatest blessing for us.
Don't worry, we're not ending this on a depressing note.
You're so gullible, kitten.
If you manage to reach here, you deserve a pat on the back. You have my gratitude for sticking with a video content noob like me and for lending an ear to my words on something I assume we're both passionate about. Structuring this video and managing somewhat of a flow were extremely hard, so I can only hope that it wasn't too repetitive or convoluted. I thought dividing the video into themes would be more straightforward, but then I had to keep returning to the same cards and similar imagery. I actually replayed everything I own in game for now. Not only the myths, but each card story. You can check the introduction video to see which cards I have. All the voice and video calls, text messages, limited events. I took so many notes, but including every example in the game about a detail I wanted to highlight, like Silas actually liking animals, made the script clunky and unbearable. So eventually, apart from a select set of cards or messages, I ended up mainly focusing on myths, since not only they are more detailed, but also they come from three different timelines and together form a much bigger picture. I also didn't want to spend this much time on Silas's character analysis. I plan to get into it in more detail in my next video on Desire, but that way I barely made any sense. As is always the case, nothing goes according to plan when pen and paper involved. You can only see how things will unfold when you actually sit down and write. Even if I didn't add every detail, I believe this video will provide a frame for you to look at Silas and help you interpret why he does or says the things he does or says. That being said, spending almost a month on revisiting everything and rediscovering so many details I missed for obvious reasons has been so much fun. I hope you enjoyed the way I read his character. I was able to highlight a detail that you found interesting, and it was easier to listen to compared to the introduction. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share, my comments or the ask box on my store page is open for you. Against my better judgment, I opened a TikTok account for this project. But yeah, I just simply sharing sneak peeks and cringy edits I made for this video, so don't expect too much. You can find the account below and consider sharing my stuff if you find anything worth sharing. No brainer there. Thank you from the bottom of my heart again, and don't forget to feed your local crows.